Hello, Bourbon Bay. This is Steven, your host of Bourbon Bay Talks, and I want to thank you guys for joining me for our second season of our podcast. And I also like to take this time and I hope everybody had a happy holiday and a happy new year, and thank all my subscribers for helping me to continue to grow this channel and for their support. I really appreciate it. And for this first episode of our second season, I have a really special treat for you guys as we have Will and Clark from from St. Augustine Distillery, this amazing and also a little bit historic craft distillery and the home of the first Florida bourbon. And Will and Clark and I discuss the history and the mission of the distillery and all that they do for their community, and then also what they plan for the future. And I really just also want to thank everybody. And if you guys have any suggestions on any future episodes, I want to make the second season a really great season for everybody. So as always, if you could put down any suggestions, if you have any advice, please always put it down in the comments. I'm happy to read those, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So I hope you guys can sit back and relax and enjoy as we discuss this amazing Florida treasure and have an amazing time. And at this time, I'd also like to thank my sponsors, Higher Order Smokers and Loaded Cannon Distillery. These are amazing Florida companies based right here in the Tampa Bay area, and I will be putting their information along with the St. Augustine Distillery information in the description. And as always, guys, sit back, relax, and enjoy, and cheers as we listen to an amazing episode of Bourbon Bay Talks and Made in Florida with St. Augustine Distillery. Thank you so much. Hey Bourbon Bay, this is your host Steven with Bourbon Bay Talks, and I'm here at St. Augustine Distillery with Will and Clark, and we're going to talk about this amazing Florida craft distillery, and I hope you guys enjoy. So I'm going to turn it over to Will, who is the Chief Operating Officer, and he's going to talk a little bit about himself and a little bit about this distillery, and we'll also have Clark introduce himself too.
Great. Well, thanks for being here, Steve. We're excited to be on. Thanks, Clark, for joining us. Anytime we get a chance to talk about what we do here, we'll talk about it to no end. And yeah, I mean, I think my story with St. Augustine Distillery, much like Clark's, kind of came about as a fan. When the distillery was getting ready to open, my folks have been here for a while, and I came and visited St. Augustine and was fortunate enough to get a tour from Philip McDaniel, one of our co-founders, who really took me through what his vision was. And the goal here was to do a couple of things. Obviously, we wanted to make real quality craft spirits, but we wanted to highlight Florida agriculture in a way that we didn't believe had been done till that point. Our focus was bourbon, but that's going to take some time. So when we started, we opened our doors with a Florida sugarcane-based vodka. Shortly thereafter, released a gin with the same sugarcane base, Florida Botanical Gin, and while we waited for our bourbon to age. But one of the unique things about our distillery is really where it is. We sit in a 100-plus-year-old building. It was one of the first ice manufacturing facilities in the state of Florida. So as I was telling you before, St. Augustine was in a large part developed by Henry Flagler. It's the oldest continuously inhabited city in the United States, built by the Spanish, and in 1565 it was founded. But really the development that we see in the modern era came about in the late 1800s when Henry Flagler kind of fell in love with the city. The story is he came with his wife, fell in love with St. Augustine. Shortly thereafter, she passed, and he decided to really build this town, almost in tribute to her, to be kind of almost like a vacation retreat for wealthy folks up in the Northeast. So he had purchased several different railroads to combine them to create the Florida East Coast Railway so people could come down here. And he built some really grand, impressive hotels, the first of which was the Ponce de Leon Hotel, which is now Flagler College. If you guys have never been here, come to visit St. Augustine, check out our distillery, and check out the city. I mean, it's really breathtaking. It's European architecture, stuff that really doesn't exist anywhere else in the country. And as he built that hotel, Shortly thereafter, he put another one in town and started realizing the opportunity that St. Augustine had. And one of those opportunities was this incredible seafood that was being brought in shore here. About 100 yards from our building, at one time, 90% of the wooden shrimp boats in the United States were built here, which is really, really cool. And this facility started as a small power plant. Very quickly after, it was transformed into an ice manufacturing facility, first of its kind in the state of Florida. So they produced block ice here. And it was used for a couple of things. For one, this was before refrigeration. Nobody had a refrigerator. You can just plug it in. If you wanted to keep food from going bad, you had an ice box. That's where the term comes from. And in this facility, they would create that block ice, chop it up into manageable pieces, and deliver it to the 20,000 some residents that lived in St. Augustine at the time. And Henry also was able to use that ice to transport seafood up to the Northeast. So they put it on the railroad cars, bring it up, and it's kind of how it all grew and blossomed. And when our co-founders, Philip McDaniel and Mike Diaz, both who had a background in business and community involvement, neither of them had a background in producing whiskey, but they knew and got some great advice from folks in the industry that you need a couple of things. Number one, you need good juice. None of it works if your bourbon or whiskey or whatever you're producing isn't good. You gotta have good juice. You need a great bottle and you need a good story. And our story came about from this facility. So we rehabilitated this building over a period of about 3 years just to get it kind of cleared out. We worked with Florida Power and Light, who owned the building, to allow us to purchase the facility and rehabilitate it, and kind of laid out what our initial tour would be. We had a lot of help from some folks in the industry, maybe the primary of which would be Dave Pickrell with Maker's Mark. Dave at the time was kind of starting his circuit of really, we call them the Johnny Appleseed of craft distilleries. He'd go around, he'd help folks like Philip and Mike figure out what they wanted to do, help design how their production equipment would be laid out, how it would work, what you would produce, and then how your guest experience would function. We're fortunate in this city to have a large visitor population. Every year St. Augustine gets many, many visitors, and we're fortunate to get quite a few here to St. Augustine Distillery, and we wanted to be able to educate folks on the age-old tradition of producing spirits by hand from scratch, and that's what our goal was. So, long-winded way of saying that's kind of the background. We opened in 2014.
2014, yep.
And started with just our vodka and worked our way up to what we have now, and we'll run through some of the bourbons that we have here to taste. But I'll let Clark tell his story. It's a really unique one about how he got involved here as well.
Yeah, a lot of it's very, very similar. I was, I came to work for this distillery as a fan of the product first, not, oh, hey, got a job, now I have to learn this stuff. It was, I had visited here also with my family, and it was just a little bit after tours had started up, but at the time I was kind of discovering my passion for bourbon. Working at a liquor store, and CEO Phil McDaniel heard that I worked for one of the local stores, and even though tours weren't running anymore, he took myself and my family around the distillery, and again kind of told us about why they created this company and what the real focus was, and that's of course making something that is truly of Florida, giving back to the community, reinvesting those dollars and making sure that everything that we do here is made by hand. And the really cool thing about craft distilling is attention to detail. And one thing that he'll always say is that of course they grow more grain out in the Midwest, and we can get a bunch more grain from the Midwest and make it here, but we want to make Florida products, Florida spirits. And when I first visited, there was no bourbon yet. It was just vodka and gin. The rum I think had just only been out for about a month, so they. At the time, I don't even think they had any for sampling. It was just the vodka and the gin. That's what it was. But I remember it being very, very good vodka, and the actual first gin that I ever liked. So I said, if this stuff is any indication of what the bourbon's going to be, then I can't wait for that to happen. But anybody that knows bourbon knows you have to wait. Oh, yeah. And so, I continued to talk about the brand. I was getting really excited about it because it was local stuff being made by local by local people with local agriculture, and I kept in touch with Phil McDaniel a little bit. A little more than a year later, we actually started selling the bourbon in the store that I worked, and I was one of the first to pick up a bottle. Went home, was talking to Phil about how great it was and everything like that, and then it was just a couple of months later that I got a notification, I think it was Instagram actually, that the distillery was hiring, and I said, I'm going to apply. And I stayed up, I think, all night. I actually wrote, I wanted to get this job so badly. It's the first time I've ever written a cover letter. I had to actually Google what that was. I was like, what do I say in a cover letter? And it was like, brag about yourself. And I was like, I'll sweep up the grains if you need. Just let me work
one of the
here.
hardest things to do, talk about yourself.
Yeah. What do I have to do to work here? I love bourbon. I know my stuff. And when I came in, one of my first interviews was actually with Phil, and he recognized me, and we talked a little bit. And within the week, I was starting here as a tour guide, kind of training up on specifically what we do and the kind of ins and outs of our stuff. And that was almost 5 years ago. So I've been here ever since. My role is essentially spirits educator. Most of the time I'm behind the tasting bar or one of the tasting stations, but I've also done several events. I've done several tastings at stores and some guided private tours that we've done in the past before, which is really a lot of fun. Gets to kind of let us bring our passion to what we do here. So I'm first and foremost here because I love this stuff and I love what we do and how we do it, and I just love talking about it.
He's in the right role.
Yep, definitely. Definitely all right.
Yeah, Clark leads a lot of our in-house staff training, spirits education and stuff, and he's just a wealth of knowledge, and there's no substitute for passion.
Oh, yeah,
And you find someone like Clark who truly wants to be in this industry, truly believes in the product and believes in where it's produced. It's just, we're fortunate to have you, bud.
Thank you.
I mean, like you guys said, it's, passion is just a very key thing, and that's kind of like one thing I've discovered in doing this is that, everybody's passionate about what they're doing, and this is kind of like we're building that history, and you guys are kind of bringing that to life. Like we talked about a little bit ago, where you said that hey, we don't have quite the history that Kentucky might have, but here we are. We're trying to bring that and show it. So how are you guys? What was the? I guess where am I trying to go with this? But yeah, where are you guys with your community involvement?
Yeah, so we stand for a few things, and a lot of it comes from the passion of our owners, but really our entire team. What we support, and maybe the first important is where we sit as a real historic community. It's the Lincolnville district in St. Augustine. It's one of the oldest independent Black communities in the United States. And we work to help support this community. We work directly with the Lincolnville Cultural Heritage Museum. It kind of represents the history of this area and make sure we're giving back to support, first and foremost, where we are, because that's exactly where we are. Really, really cool neighborhood. I recommend you take a walk. You've got some cool historic homes in here, and it's really an interesting kind of connection to St. Augustine. We're also very big at supporting the arts, so we support the St. Augustine Amphitheater. It's incredible amphitheater. If you've never been, we get some really, really wonderful acts. The team there does a great job, and we're big supporters and sponsors there. And we also support Habitat for Humanity. We're getting ready to build our 4th Habitat home, which is really, really exciting. We get the whole team involved and go out and do these build days and stuff, and that's the company giving back to help build these homes. And it's a real tangible result of what you've done, right?
Yeah.
Reality is there's a million charities, and you'd like to give to all of them, but you have to be selective in what you can do. And that one for us is so exciting because it's such an immediate, how do I say it, just immediate satisfaction, right? You see the family that's been placed in this home. You see the impact on our team when you go out and do these days, and it's tangible, which is really
You can watch the house go up.
Yeah, so that's it. But we're always open to more. Right now we're working with the amphitheater team to do the Fort Mose Jazz and Blues Festival, which Fort Mose is a little bit north of St. Augustine. Really, really interesting. It was one of the first free Black settlements in Florida. Perfect time to talk about this right now with Martin Luther King weekend coming upon us. Yeah. And that was back when Florida was still owned by Spain. They welcomed Black folks to come to Florida, and then they would be given their freedom. And they developed this fort and kind of a little community there. And the fort actually defended St. Augustine to folks who came from Georgia, Oglethorpe, and all those coming from Savannah. So it's a really interesting history that was found somewhat recently. They found the ruins of this fort, kind of dug up all the information. So we're supporting this program to help raise funds to hopefully rebuild an example of that fort and really just bring awareness to this really, really cool thing. I've lived here for about 4 years now, Clark much longer than I. You just don't know that this exists. It's like a little tiny state park, and you go there, it's breathtaking. It's along the marshes and underneath these wonderful oak trees. So I'll pour, you can talk.
All right.
Don't tell them what time it is.
Yeah, it's appropriate time.
Yeah, exactly. We're awake. It's fine. We're here.
Or it's 2020. We lived through that. It's all good.
Yeah.
So we're going to start off with our Florida Straight Bourbon, which is kind of like, think about this as sort of our small batch. which of course we don't really label it a small batch because our largest batch possible is only 60 barrels at a time. And when a lot of other distillers are calling their small batch, 2,000, 3,000 barrels, we're not able to ever do that much. But this is our Florida straight bourbon. Every batch that we do is of course made from start to finish with a sweet mash. We're not doing any sour mash with it. But it's a very unique mash bill because rather than using rye as a secondary grain, we're actually not using any rye. The climate down here in Florida is not amazing for growing rye, aging rye, or in the summertime really sipping rye. Think about those sort of hotter, spicier flavors, which are great when it's cooler and drier. But we're also not using the secondary grain being wheat. We're actually technically making a malted bourbon using 22% malted barley under that 60% Florida sweet corn, and then 18% wheat. So the wheat content is roughly the same to a lot of other wheated bourbons, but where we really kind of let that barley shine, it picks up a bit more of an earthy, nutty sort of fruitier flavor. So it ends up being almost the quintessential Florida straight bourbon. Bottling at 88 proof, this is actually very approachable even to a lot of people that either are not used to drinking bourbon or have not found a bourbon that they like just yet. Maybe sometimes they feel it's a little intense. If you go to your buddy and say, hey, I'm trying to get into scotch. Well, I've been drinking scotch for 30 years. Best stuff I have is a 16-year-old peated malt, and that's going to be a little overwhelming. So a lot of people, when they come and they're like, I see you have so many bourbons, it's a little overwhelming. Where do we start? The Florida Straight is a really nice first offering. It's consistent, approachable, very good balance of grain and oak, and well, let's try it.
Yep. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Yeah, I definitely get a nice, kind of like little leather, but you definitely get some of the nice, cherry almost in there.
Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of depth to it, which is what I love. It's really rich and full flavor.
Which is surprising for 88 proof.
Yeah, and then also for only being aged 3 years. And I mean, so to some of my viewers who may not know what the sweet mash versus sour mash, I mean, you want to kind of explain that?
So sour mash is essentially the process of using backset from a previous distillation, which is essentially called the distiller's grains. When it's come out of the still, we've already taken all the alcohol. But again, as far as working with our locals in the community, we actually have partnerships with local farmers that will come and pick up that sweet mash and then take it back to their farm, to their cows and their pigs and their animals. And again, there's no alcohol in there, but they're very protein and enzyme rich, which is great for the animals. A lot of sugars there. But what we actually do is every single time we do batch distillation, every time we make it, it's going to be, we're making it the same way, but there are benefits of doing batch distillation, meaning every time that you make it, it is allowed to evolve. It is allowed to change over time. So the consistency is there. But every single year that we're open, our bourbon is changing ever so slightly. And sour mashing is something that a lot of larger commercial distillers do as a microbial protection for their yeast, as a way to keep their fermentation and their distillation a little bit more consistent. Which is, of course, what you want if you're making a brand of bourbon or any kind of whiskey that you can find in any liquor store all over the globe. That's what you want, is that consistency. But as a small craft distillery, our distribution pretty much goes here to Florida. And so one thing that we do want is to be allowed the opportunity to grow and evolve. And one of the ways that we do that is every batch of bourbon that we make is essentially starting from scratch, using the same blueprint, the same recipe. But every time we do it, there are little variables there that are allowed to change.
Well, I mean, I think the sweet mash just allows it, like you said, for it being, it's a smoother bourbon like you talked about. It's just really enjoyable. And, I mean, you definitely get some more notes. And, it seems like from batch to batch, it does change a little bit, like you said. And, I mean, you kind of get definitely that caramel in there.
Right.
Which is really good. And, I mean, it's kind of interesting too, it's funny how you guys said you use one mash bill, but depending on the barrel, the aging process, it's like how that flavor profile can just change and just.
That's exactly right,
Yeah,
and that's key to
Yeah.
us. I mean, we operate with one mash bill. You're looking at 3 different products. A lot of that is achieved by finishing, but we expect barrels to have unique attributes. And just like a lot of distilleries, when we find one that either doesn't line up with our typical flavor profile or stands out as something unique, it may wind up in our fill your own experience here, which is where we show off a lot of our single barrels. Guests can come and actually fill the bottle themselves, do all the labeling. It's a ton of fun. You leave with a really unique bottle. And we change those barrels out regularly as we get new barrels coming alive. But it is all the same mash bill. It's all the same juice coming off the still. So those variances is kind of what allows us to achieve unique things. Now our goal with the Florida Straight is a consistent product. So our distillers are going to make blends appropriate to achieve. It is getting refined every year. It is improving every year. But ultimately, we like to have some variance. It allows us to do some creative things. And it's not baked in necessarily. And for the most part, we're using the same barrels. So our barrels come from Kelvin Cooperage in Louisville, Kentucky. It's the last family-owned cooperage in the U.S. Really, really cool place. Great folks. All their barrels are actually done over a coal-based fire, correct? They're not done over gas flames.
Gas.
You visit them, and these guys, I mean, it looks like something out of Game of Thrones. You've got dudes with forearms the side of my
It's the
thighs.
coolest thing to see.
Crazy. And we've used them since our start. And as we began, we tried a lot of different char levels, and as Lucas, our director of production, told you downstairs, we tried a lot of different yeasts, but we've really settled on where we are now. For the most part, we're using the same barrel, same char level, same wood, believe it or not. We use primarily Minnesota oak, correct? And we do that because you've got tighter pores in the wood that comes from that region. We find it kind of gives us the amount of oak influence that we look for in bourbon. We've got a really unique climate here in Northeast Florida. You've got frequent high pressure systems, you've got serious heat, and all that really creates a lot of push and pull with bourbon with the wood. So in some degree, we like to limit that by using the tighter poured wood. But all these things, result in a product that is consistent, but when you find one that stands out, it's that much more impactful, that much more important.
One of the coolest things about bourbon, at least in my opinion, is that it's one of the few things that, by federal law, you're not allowed to say, oh, this didn't turn out the way I wanted. Let's add some caramel flavor to it. Let's add, it's, as consistent as we do make it, as I mentioned, we're using the same recipe, but once we put it into the barrel, we're responsible for making sure that the stuff that comes off the still is, good enough to go into the barrel and making sure of all that. But once we put it in the barrel, good night, for 3 years, and that barrel made of oak, nature grown. The grains we're using, grown in the soil here in Florida. So, terroir, you hear this word thrown around a lot. It has everything to do with the soil, the climate, the locale, the proximity to the sea, your storm situation. It all has an influence on it because bourbon is first and foremost a natural product. And so as much control as we really have, that's really just chemistry and recipes. Florida's natural climate has a lot of influence on how it's actually going to turn out. And as we saw downstairs with the barrels, a lot of those older triple digit barrels, you can actually look really, really close and you can see some say Missouri, some say Ohio, some say Minnesota oak. What we found is that the oak grown in the colder, drier climate of Minnesota is better for aging bourbon in the warmer, more humid climate of Northeast Florida. But it took years to come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's always such an interesting topic is with the, where the distillation plays a lot of the factor in there too. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, the barrel, just the maturation process does play a lot in the flavor profile. And I think with you guys with the higher malted barley, and that Minnesota oak, it definitely, comes to giving some really unique flavors out of it. And I think, I even tasted a little orange. I mean, that might be a little weird, but yeah, I think it's just a really cool, interesting factor that I guess not many people realize that, it's just what the process is that goes into it. And so,
and you're not the first to say that you get a little hint of orange from it. And while again we can't add any to that, I think it just has to do with we're in Florida. Yeah. It's gonna have that flavor.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of funny too. It's Florida, as you said, with the terroir, it's its own terroir, just like Kentucky and Texas as well. Where Texas, you get kind of more of that spicier notes.
Right.
I think Florida, you almost get some more citrus notes out of it and a little bit smoother. And, so I mean, is there any other? I mean, and then like with you guys going with like San Sebastian, and you guys do a lot of and you guys share the barrels with them as well, right?
Kind of taking the next one's pretty cool. So our first finished bourbon. So we're a one mash bill distillery. We're about a block away from the San Sebastian winery. Great folks. They do wines produced in Florida. Some wines produced out of state as well. They've got a great tour you can come visit, and they've been doing port wine for a very long time. They've been using these barrels that came out of a distillery in Georgia that's no longer operating. And when we started, our owners known these folks for a long time and heavily involved, and they said, hey, we'd like to do a port finished bourbon. So as we created our first batch of bourbon, we worked with them to get some port wine barrels, those same barrels, and I think they're from like 1989 or something.
Oh, yeah,
some of them come
barrels.
really,
really cool.
Yeah, those are old.
You come to our warehouse facility, you can see them, they're like, oh yeah, those are the old ones. But what I really love about it, and we'll pour it in a second here, is we're one of the only distilleries, to my knowledge, that only uses their port wine barrels one time before they're recharged. Okay. So our process is, we call it a barrel exchange program. So we're going to get those barrels from the winery, we're going to fill them, we're going to let that rest for at least 100 days in there to get a lot of that port wine flavor. You can see how much darker it is from the Florida straight. Remember, that's the same product, same age statement in general. And we're going to fill them one time, and then we're going to fill some bottles and send those barrels back to the winery. They're going to recharge them with port. So it's a really cool, unique story. We also do a rum. We call it Stone's Throw rum because the winery's a stone's throw away, and that rum is aged entirely in port wine barrels. Same molasses base and Florida molasses that we use for our pot distilled rum, which is aged in our bourbon barrels. But this one, in the case, it's done in these port wine barrels. But you get a lot of influence, and I'll stop talking about it. We can start drinking it.
That is starting to be kind of a bigger thing when it comes to the industry now. You're starting to see a lot of these finished products.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, port's a big one. I mean, we know with Angel's Envy, they do the sherry cask. I mean, is it something that you guys are probably going to maybe expand a little bit on? Or?
Yeah, without giving away secrets, we've got more coming. If you guys don't have us on Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff, make sure you check us out this year. We've got quite a few finished whiskeys coming out that we're all real excited about. You know, the fun in it is kind of the hunt, right? You hear stories of chefs, traveling the globe to find spices they're going to use to make a unique thing. And while we've already done that with our grains, the barrels give us an opportunity to do it again. Whether you're tracking down sherry barrels or port barrels or Armagnac or whatever it is, there's cognac. Yeah, there's so much you can do. And at the end of the day, bourbon is a heavily regulated product. You can only do so much and call it bourbon, and finishing is one of the few ways you can impart some unique characteristics and flavor, particularly if you only have one mash bill. And that's our approach here. So it allows us to take that single recipe and kind of expand. So we love it. Keeps our distillers interested. We're always looking for what's next. And I agree. I mean, you see it all around the industry. It's been really cool over the past, probably 5 years or so to really see finish OCs really expand.
Yeah, it really has.
The cool things about it, for me at least, is that it allows us as a small craft distiller, let's say that we've made bourbon number 1 successfully so, and then we say, all right, now what are we going to do for bourbons 2, 3, 4, etc. Let's start from scratch and wait another 3 years to see if this new mash bill works. Like, we're very small already. So having different barrel finishes allows us to really kind of expand on the main, kind of character base of our straight bourbon and offer up more complexity, more richness, few more layers of flavor there, almost like a stewed fruit, cinnamon, spice, spice-ish, not really spicy, but spice-ish, and it just, you can tell that it's definitely made from the same bourbon, but as I mentioned, it's just that little extra time in a port wine barrel gives it so much more character without physically putting any port wine in the bourbon. And it really allows us to, again, as having one mash bill, say these are some different offerings, and they are all, very unique, and it really shows the versatility of what one distillery really can do.
So for this port finished bourbon, we're jumping up to 102 proof, so a little higher than the Florida Straight. In a lot of ways, it's almost easier to drink. You get such a dessert influence from that port wine barrel, particularly on the nose. To me, it's cherries, marshmallows, all kinds of really, really sweet notes coming through.
Yeah, I mean, I even get. With some of the spice that Clark was talking about, I even get like a little peppermint somewhat.
As soon as you said marshmallow, I smelled it.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the funny thing too, is like usually when someone else smells something, it's like, hey, look, I smell it.
It's funny like that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, I do get the cherry on the taste, and then almost like a little bit of licorice and like on the finish. And yeah, I mean, to me, this would I mean, it's good on its own, but it would be good in a couple cocktails, like old fashions or Manhattans, and it would stick out. It wouldn't be hidden by a lot.
And a little higher proof helps it stand up to other ingredients too, if you'd like to do it. Yeah. And to me, what comes through, similarly with the Florida Straight, I use the term depth, but it's those tobacco kind of leather notes that they're in all of our bourbons, which we love. It's a really unique flavor profile. As I told you downstairs, Clark and I are bourbon fans.
Yeah.
We're going to tell you ours is the best, but we try most of them. And,
I only drink White Claw. I don't know.
And if you give me a lineup, I think part of it is really being accustomed with what we produce here. But I really, really believe our bourbon is unique, and I can pick it out of a blind lineup in a way that I can't with a lot of other folks.
Well, like I know the first time I ever had you guys, it was when it was still the double cast, and I loved it. And I always made the stupid decision to bring it to a party or something, and it would always be gone because everybody, like, they try it and poof, it'd be gone, But yeah, so I mean, I kind of like that fact that you guys have you had that evolution where first it was the double cast, where, I mean, if you guys want to kind of explain that process a little bit, kind of going back, I know, but to where and then kind of going back to the Florida Straights, you guys are kind of one of the only few that have the Florida Straight. I mean, and I don't know if there is a definition yet for Florida Straight, like if there's regulations.
Well, it's a federal definition of a straight whiskey. It's got to be at least 2 years product of one distillation season. So we do qualify as a Florida Straight whiskey, and I believe we still are maybe the only one, certainly the first, which we're really excited about. But yeah, to touch on double cask, I mean, again, it was that same mash bill. We're highlighting Florida ingredients, using 60% Florida corn, 22% barley. That doesn't come from Florida because it doesn't grow here, and then 18% Florida wheat. But we talked a little about the Florida climate and the impact it has on aging, and we started with what was kind of the craft standard. It was a 25-gallon barrel, same cooperage, Kelvin cooperage, variety of oaks at the time, as Clark touched on. But we learned very quickly that it was getting a lot of influence from the oak, almost at a faster rate. It wasn't quite mature, but you're getting that influence. So our team made the decision to transfer it into a full-size barrel, 53-gallon barrel. If you think about it, less surface area, more juice on the inside, less contact with the wood, right? So it's going to kind of limit it. And as a result, we called that first batch double cask because it went from 2 casks. So I think what I appreciate about that is kind of the transparency of what we do here, and saying that we're taking you along the journey and we're going to figure it out. We're making Florida bourbon. Here we go. And that was, I just like you, was purchasing the double cask as just a fan of St. Augustine Distillery, to come on board and learn how that approach is just ingrained in our culture. We're not shy to explain why we do things and why we try things. We're also not shy to say, hey, we think this makes it better. And that's what we've done with the Florida Straight. We've improved the product. It's aged entirely in 53-gallon barrels, and you get a more consistent product, a little less spice from the wood. Is that about right?
I think that what changed the most between, let's say, so our first batch of the double cask versus our current batch of the Florida Straight, it's like night and day. When we were first coming out with that bourbon, it was a really great way to see what Florida was doing at the time in just a short amount of time. But the biggest difference that I can tell from the last batch of the double cask and what we're currently making as a Florida Straight bourbon, in my opinion, kind of like Will, has less to do with the flavor and more how it sits. Because it's like, there's a lot of there's a trend about a lot of people bringing home little mini 2-liter barrels and then filling it up with moonshine, wanting to make bourbon. And what you're essentially doing is it's going to take a very short amount of time, but that time is not going to be long enough for it to fully mature. So it's going to sure taste like a bourbon, but what you really want is that sippable quality as well. So with the straight bourbon being aged a full 3 years minimum in new charred oak barrels, the 53-gallon rather than 25-gallon, it really does taste like a classic, very, very much matured and complex bourbon, especially at 88 proof. So in my opinion, the biggest difference to me is that, the Florida Straight bourbon, I think, sips a little bit more with a longer finish, not quite as sharply, but still tastes like, if you were a fan of the double cask, the straight bourbon's still the way to go.
Oh, yeah. No, I love it. Yeah.
There's a little more richness to it, I think.
There's a little bit more complexity to it. I mean, and even though it tastes, again, like a bourbon, but, I mean, it has its own uniqueness, too. And then, like, I think that kind of jumping back to the port finish, too, is like, as it kind of opens up a little bit more with the oxygen, gets in there, you start to get more flavor profile,
Right.
and like you start to get a little bit more. I think, I don't know, like maybe a little bit of strawberry and something.
Yeah. Ripe red fruit
Definitely
for
some
sure.
Yeah, you get the red fruits, and it's kind of just interesting how how those barrels play with it, and
One of the things I hear Clark say regularly as he's interacting with guests in our facility is, bourbon's not a race. You take your
No.
time. It's not a race to make it. It's not a race to drink it, and that's the nice thing. You sit down, you enjoy it. And what I
Ready
love
when
is
it's ready.
it's ready when it's ready, and it continues to evolve in your glass.
Oh, yeah.
You get alcohol burning off and flavors evolving, and something that starts sharp and finishes sweet, and
yeah, it has some nice oils to it.
Got such
Yeah.
a beautiful nose on it.
Yeah, and
One
I
thing
mean,
I hear.
like you guys said too, it's like that's one thing why I love bourbons and whiskeys in general is because it makes you slow down.
yeah.
Mhm.
It slows down people. You open up, you chat, and you have a good conversation.
Well, that's why I love reading about and listening to your podcast. When we first met, it's all about the experiences that are created by bourbon,
Yeah.
and that's why we're in this industry. I mean, we're excited to share the experience of producing this product with our visitors, explaining, as I said, kind of this age-old tradition of
Yeah.
distillation. It's one of the few things in the world that just hasn't changed that much.
No, I mean, it's,
And you've seen, the way we do it now is pretty close to the way we did it 100
Oh,
years
yeah.
ago, and it's just such an important piece of this country. And we're all about history here in St. Augustine. We'll tell you about it till you're blue in the face, but the reality is, distillation has been a part of what we do here for a very long time, and
We just know a little more about it.
yeah, exactly. We got some tools.
Yeah.
And that's what's fun. To me, it's about how it brings it together. The port finish is always special to me. I've shared it with some real close family, some of whom aren't around anymore, and it's just something you always look back on the experiences that you've had and the bourbon you've shared.
I mean, I think too also is like just and then I know this is going, but like the way you guys have your bottle shaped and the labels, and then of course you have the image of the ice house in the back. And
Yeah,
I think it
totally.
just kind of brings it. It's like a bourbon that looks like it's been around for a very long time, not just since 2014, but longer. And I just love how it kind of just incorporates that history.
Thank you,
So, yeah.
appreciate it. Yeah, it's like a little
It's
Easter
comforting.
egg that's not always found. We've got this guy sitting dark on the shelf. You may not
Yeah.
see it, but that is our facility, a 100-year-old ice manufacturing facility, and like I told you downstairs, 100 years ago they made the first block ice in Florida in this building, and 100 years later we made the first bourbon. I'll
Oh,
never
yeah.
get tired of that fact. It's like my favorite thing. So
But yeah, I mean, if you guys want to
Yeah,
go on and talk about the Saint, which is your guys'
so this
6-year-olds.
The Saint, it's not necessarily a lockdown age, varies
Oh.
from batch to batch. With the Saint, we tend to take our oldest available bourbon, but it's kind of about the profile we're trying to achieve. The Saint is unique, so we have a couple wonderful, like really high quality cocktail mixtures that we make here. Or that we offer here. They're produced from real ingredients, real juice, no preservatives. And we have this old-fashioned mix. We're set on this goal to be able to show folks how to make a quality old-fashioned at home without a lot of struggle. So what we do to achieve this is, Clark will tell a much better story on how we produce that mix. Someone else will do.
So essentially, our old-fashioned mix utilizes very much the same, mid 19th century ingredients that would have been available around the time that the old-fashioned was quite literally called the whiskey cocktail.
Yeah.
It's an older cocktail than even the federal laws regarding bourbon. Bourbon at that time was just a name you added to your whiskey to sell more of it.
Yeah.
But essentially, the old-fashioned is a great way to make whiskey or rye or bourbon or any kind of aged spirit a little bit more approachable to drink as a nice cocktail with more flavor, but also without kind of overshadowing the real character of that whiskey. So our old-fashioned mix, we're only using it as a 1 part mix to 4 parts bourbon ratio, but the specific ingredients are Florida Golden Cane sugar, gentian root, which is a natural bitters ingredient that is mostly used by Angostura house bitters. That's one of the most popular brands of bitters, and it's also good for your digestive health. But there is cinchona bark, which is also where we would get quinine for like tonic, for muscle and joint pain, and of course modern problems like scurvy and malaria. But the cinchona is also what Peychaud uses in their bitters. So we have 2 natural, period accurate ingredients that are used by 2 of the best-selling bitters companies as a natural ingredient in this old-fashioned mix. And of course, as Floridians, our mix is going to have natural orange peel. But that mix, just to kind of get all those flavors nice and blended together and make sure that it has the perfect pairing with our bourbon, We actually, again, a way of recycling our empty bourbon barrels. We send those barrels to the manufacturers of our old-fashioned mix, and they make it specifically based for us. They age it in those bourbon barrels. Eventually, they call us up and say, "Hey, we're done with all these barrels. What do you want us to do?" Send them back. So we got them back. Did something that, as far as we know, nobody has ever done. We took some of that first, Florida straight bourbon, a couple of hand-selected barrels from this batch. This is a limited 300 bottle batch. So that's 3 barrels max. That's all we really got of this batch. And we let it finish in those old-fashioned mixed barrels for a handful of months and just, remain a, fully fledged barrel strength bourbon. That's one of the things is that, 88 proof on the Florida straight, 102 proof on the port finished. That's random. Why not 90? Why not 102? Yeah. They were actually both very carefully selected based on proof. We tried each one of them from cask strength all the way down to the legal minimum of 80, decided on 88 and 102 respectively. When we tried the Saint out of the barrel and said, "Oh man, this is fantastic. How should we bottle this?" Put it in the bottle. So this is uncut, unfiltered. This particular batch is 112.7 proof from a 110 proof barrel entry after aging for just shy of 4 years in new charred oak and then about 3 to 6 months in a used old-fashioned mixed barrel. It drinks and tastes just like barrel strength bourbon. On your palate, you're going to get that, but on the finish and on the nose, again, rich, spiced citrus notes to it. It's the perfect bourbon if you like barrel strength bourbon and you like old fashions, but you're really just in the mood for a glass of bourbon. And again, one of those things where it is like natural pause button. It's not like, "Oh man, our ride's going to be here in 5 minutes. Let's have a quick glass of the Saint." More one of those ones around this time of year, especially. Is everybody ready to go to the fire pit? Everybody got your glass? We're going to be out there for a while.
Yeah.
It's an excellent sipping bourbon, and one of my favorite things about it is not necessarily about the bourbon itself, but when I bring it out, when I share it with people and who I share it with. That's what I really love about it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just like just a really good story, and like you said, I mean, yeah, because that's like we were talking about with the old-fashioned mix and stuff like that, and that's it's interesting. Like people don't know like the history about some of the cocktails that they're getting,
right?
And you get these cocktails that were around, and like you were talking about that. Hey, bourbon back then was your original medicine. That was it. This is what people were using. They were doing the drinks, just like the mint julep. That was a drink that people drink in the morning to get themselves going.
And a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting, that kind of heritage of really spirits in general, but whiskey specifically, bourbon specifically, and it's just unique, and it's something we're proud of. And we talked a little bit downstairs about kind of the different artifacts we have of like the Northeast Florida whiskey heritage and stuff. One of the ones is an example of a medical spirits license, just like we have medical marijuana licenses today. It's pretty interesting for sure.
And then yeah, I mean, this is, I think this is really good. You definitely get, like, the brown sugar, the cinnamon.
Yeah.
It's one of the most flavorful bourbons that, personally, I think we've ever come out with. And, again, being that it is 112.7 proof, and, of course, you're always welcome to disagree with what I think about something. To me, the best thing about this is that the proof really helps along the complexity of the bourbon on your palate, but you don't really, feel that proof until it's about right here. And at that point, it's just a really pleasant, I'm feeling really smiley.
Like nice and warm and
Exactly. And that's why I love it for this time of year, especially when you're in, a setting, social setting with friends, family. This is a really great bourbon because it has such a nice story. And you can really, like, if you have this and you say, "Oh, let me bring this out, let me tell you about this," and then nobody's going to be like, "Oh, wonderful," This ain't that kind of bourbon.
No, this is definitely a sipper, relax. I mean, one of the things I kind of like, and you had mentioned, is how it goes into the barrel at 110 proof, but yet we're at 112, and I think, like, some people just don't realize. So, like, I mean, and what do you consider, like, what kind of does that? Is it just when it comes to the
Well, the unique thing to me is it can go either way. Barrel entry proof with bourbon, your maximum is 125.
Yeah.
There's a lot of regulation on what bourbon can do. And we tend to do a little on the lower side. We find we get a better product that way. The most economical thing is to put all your bourbon as 125 proof because you're going to get more barrels or more bottles out of every barrel. It's that simple. We started at 110, recently made a move to 115, again, based on flavor profile and what we're trying to achieve. But evaporation is a unique thing, and the angels are going to take what the angels are going to take.
Very thirsty down here.
I love what you said downstairs. In Florida, we have thirsty angels because it couldn't be more true. But exactly the science behind why sometimes you're going to get more water evaporation versus alcohol evaporation, I couldn't tell you, but it is unique, and it's different from every batch. Sometimes we will come out with something that is at a lower proof than it went into the barrel, and sometimes, like this example in front of us, it's going to climb. What I love is that the Saint and our port finished are done in very limited quantities. For the Saint, we do at most 5 barrel batches. So this one was less, but as a result, every batch is a little unique. I mean, just like we've got variants in different barrels, there's variants in the influence of the bittering agents in our old fashioned and all the things that is done. So this one, as I take it, this is our summer batch of last year, April 2021. Yeah. And I taste it, and maybe I'm still in holiday mode, but I get heavy baking spice, almost gingerbread.
It's bringing back. I remember this one being very leathery, and as soon as I tasted it, I was like,
and
I love this batch.
Well, I even get a hint of the orange peel, like you were talking about, from the old fashioned mix, and then you do get some of like the bitter flavor in there as well. And especially on the finish, like it's even kind of lingering in the mouth a little bit.
For me, it's almost an homage to cocktails, right? I mean, the resurgence of bourbon, we need to thank bartenders. It is the resurgence of cocktails that help push this forward. The reason I'm here today is because one day I watched Mad Men and said, I want to make an old fashioned. Turns out I prefer my old fashions like George Washington makes them, not like Don Draper makes them. But it is that heritage, that's history. It's learning how we produce these old cocktails, and you learn about those that survived Prohibition, our old fashions, our Manhattans, our martinis, and the dozens of others that didn't make it through. No. And when all of the great bartenders in the United States went to Europe and France and all these places, and we lost a lot. But there's this modern movement to really bring back the importance of, just like we want to make food farm to table, making whiskey, grain to glass, and creating craft specialty cocktails that don't have the goal of hiding the alcohol, but highlighting it and bringing it in and saying, I'm going to use this to pair with sweet vermouth because it's going to highlight these flavors. I'm going to use the Saint straight. I'm going to, whatever it is, and that to me is just so special. It's such an interesting time. We've watched it evolve in St. Augustine too. When we started, the city's been around a long time.
Yes,
you're going to hear that a lot, by the way, a long time. In I would say the past 8 years, there's been a real flourishing food and beverage scene. We've got a bunch of great restaurants, a bunch of great cocktail bars, and all of them with a focus on quality. And we're just grateful to be a part of it, grateful to be something that those folks consider to use. And I'm always reminded when I talk about the history of bourbon that the reason it's, same reason we can't find a lot of it today, but the reason it's back and not something that we're trying to redistill or cut to make a light whiskey or a clear spirit is in large part thanks to bartenders. So to me, when I talk about an old-fashioned finished bourbon, it's almost an homage, right? It's almost just a pay tribute to that. So.
Well, I mean, going off of what you said, I mean, the fact is the cocktail culture is just coming back, and things with bourbon, I mean, why it's amazing, neat or straight, or on the rocks, but it's just so versatile too. You can use it in so many different cocktails, and like you said, it brings back a lot. And thank God to bartenders, especially these ones that are going out there, they're traveling the world, and they're bringing back old recipes that from long, that were lost for a while. And I mean, one thing I kind of liked about is where with Maker's Mark with the 110. And industry standards 120. Well, a lot of people don't remember too. Is like before Prohibition, that was kind of like the old traditional way to make really good bourbon was doing it at that lower proof. And I think you guys are kind of bringing back that old, historic mark, which is great. Not that. I mean,
the way that I really kind of see what we do here, and trying to get through this without getting emotional, of course, is because all three of us, obviously very passionate about this, and just because the world is progressing so quickly into, you need anything, you can buy it with a click and it'll be at your house. Everything is now, bigger, better, more. It's kind of the responsibility of craft distillers to be the stewards of the tradition that kind of paved the way for bourbon to really be what it is, and bartenders to, like you talk to any bartender in St. Augustine.
Higher life. His cocktail was Jim Beam, Diet Caffeine-Free Coke. And man, that's the only time I've almost said, you try something different? But that's what he loved. And, my now wife and I have been together about 9 years, and we, for a short while, lived near these folks in Spring Hill area, about an hour north of Tampa. And I'm so grateful that we had that time with them. About 30 minutes from them, spent a lot of time. And through actually our port finished bourbon, this is the story I touched on briefly, spending time with him and discussing bourbon and, not having a chip on your shoulder about the way people like to drink it helps people change too. And some of our fondest memories is towards the latest years of his life, exchanging texts with him about him going down the journey we've all gone down of collecting and buying and trying different bourbons. And towards the end of his life, when he found an interest in his Angel's Envy, and I said, well, you gotta get back to our port finish. But we were always just trading stuff, and it's just we look back on that so fondly, and frequently we have a pour and remember him, and I just love the memories that are ingrained in that. And if we had come to that with a chip on our shoulder or with a pedantic attitude about the way you should drink your bourbon, you lose all of it. You lose the ability to connect with friends, connect with family. The way people like their stuff is the way they like their stuff. If you're going to order a steak well done, the cook's going to judge you, I'm going to judge you, but I'm not going to say anything.
No.
I'm still going to make your steak.
Yeah, I'm still going to make you your steak.
And that's just what it's all about. Everybody's different, everybody's unique, and there's something out there for everyone.
I think that's what's great about it, and I really, I think it's just awesome that we have that opportunity. And like you said, with the culinary culture going out there, especially here in the state of Florida, I know like Tampa is a growing area. But probably to kind of just ask one more question. So like, what's the future hold for St. Augustine? You have like more where you plan on expanding on, maybe doing some older bourbons, or?
For sure. every year we try to get a little older. We also try to meet the needs of our customers. And at the end of the day, we're a craft distiller with limited production capacity. We're not big brands pumping out, thousands of gallons a day. So we're limited in what we can offer. We continue to stick with our one mash bill and refine it. New bourbon-focused products from us are probably going to continue to come with finished products. That we'll do on a limited basis, exclusive batches, as we continue to find these interesting barrels. If we can create a unique product and unique story.
Maybe like a single barrel or...
Yeah, and we continually have single barrels available here through our fill your own process, but we will have hopefully more single barrel releases statewide through Florida. Great partners in Total Wine and other retailers, Publix, ABC, and now in your area, Lucan's carry our products, and we're excited to kind of get more exclusive offerings from them. You see the Florida Straight and the Port Finish pretty much throughout the state, so you can check out those products and try them. I think from an experiential standpoint, that's where things are going to change the most for us. Clark and I are both really, really excited for this year as we roll out more in-depth bourbon experiences, things like cocktail classes and real education-based programs that are going to be in a more intimate environment. I shared with you our new tasting room downstairs. Wonderful room that we've remodeled to fit 18 folks, and one of our more knowledgeable educators to really take you through the journey. That is our focus. We want you to take the journey with us. We're going to change, we're going to evolve, the spirits are going to change, the spirits are going to evolve, but our approach, which is to inspire you, to educate you, not just to buy our products, but to know more about what you consume and the impact it has on the environment, the community, and everything. That's our focus. And this year, just like every year, we try to get better.
So like basically kind of helping people kind of realize, like, look, this comes from where this is from. It's not, because to, again, have the Fresh from Florida logo, you have to have.
That's huge.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great thing, is that, Fresh from Florida, and of course I'm sure that has to come with some regulation, like so much has to come from Florida.
Absolutely.
But, and then with the education, and then you guys have a plan as well with the Florida Craft Spirit Association to become a part of that Florida Craft Spirit Trail as well?
Yeah, we are involved in the FCSA, and I'm grateful for the work the group has done. Really the exciting thing for me, as we touched on, is to see the distilling environment in Florida have become more of a community. You know, you hear the wonderful stories of Kentucky about how they support each other. We talked about Heaven Hill following the fire, how other distilleries in the area would let them produce overnight while their distillery was, you know, being rebuilt. Just stories and stories about how the industry supports each other and really believe that the rising tide floats all ships.
Yep.
And that's what I think we finally are achieving in Florida. You're seeing distilleries not look at each other as competition and say, what's good for that guy is good for me, or good for that gal is good for me. Mm-hmm. And the trail is just another example of it. I believe, as a consumer and an enthusiast, when I go in an area, whether it's Kentucky or Asheville for beer, whatever it is, I'm going to visit most of them. Particularly if I'm there for a few days. Give me a passport to get stamps, and I'm just going to do it even more. So we're excited to be a part of that program, and really anything the FCSA rolls out, you'll see St. Augustine Distillery hopefully be involved in, hopefully be a pioneer in, because that means a lot to us.
And kind of to touch on that, one thing I'm like super looking forward to again is, you know, of course, new products always exciting. But one thing I'm very excited about is that over the past year we have been working on getting all of our staff as educated as possible, and you know, we've been putting a lot of them through the Stave and Thief certification to, you know, basically say, hey, we know our stuff. This little pen says so. Yeah. But it's one of those things where I'm very excited to help to make St. Augustine, Florida, an unlikely and unique center for like bourbon history and bourbon information, and you know, especially like with our barrel finished bourbons in the St., what's coming out, you know, next, innovation. And you know, you normally think about, well, you know, you got to go to Kentucky to get the real history and knowledge and information, but if we have a passionate staff, we'll tell you anything you need to know. And that's one thing I'm very excited about rolling out, is these educational classes and programs, and you know, cocktail nights and bourbon experiences, is that when you come here, whether you want to or not, we're going to teach you some stuff. So that's one thing that I really do love, and where, you know, COVID kind of made it a little bit more difficult to have those sort of expanded interactions, and that's something that we're very excited to bring back.
Yeah, and I think that's just awesome, because I think education is just very important about that, and, you know, getting to teach people, because I mean, you do have a lot of people that think, okay, bourbon only comes from Kentucky.
Right.
It's like, no, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm. We get voicemails once a week, but
I'm sure you. Yeah,
nice.
Trust me, I get that all the time at my, you know, where I work. But you know, and then you tell them, it's like, no, as long as it's produced in the United States and it follows these rules, it can be bourbon. Mm-hmm. I mean, Jeremy Russell is famous for saying that, you know, hey, I could put a charred oak little bucket on the still, and it can be called bourbon. It won't taste good, but it can be called bourbon, you know? Yeah. So it's kind of funny in that. And I think the more you, like with your guys' programs, it's just going to make even better that, you know, Florida can be its own unique little bourbon area. And I'm just excited to see what comes, you know? So I really appreciate you guys taking the time, Will and Clark. And thank you guys for joining me in my first episode of the second season. And hope you guys have a great and awesome time, and always, guys, if you're going to have a drink, have it with us. And cheers and ushkabe.
Cheers. Thanks for having us on, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for watching this episode of Made in Florida. I want to thank Will and Clark for taking their time and joining me and sharing their stories and the history, story, and mission of St. Augustine Distillery. If you like this episode, please subscribe. I would appreciate it, and all the support helps. Also, comment down below and let me know your thoughts. I want to thank my presenting sponsors, Higher Order Smokers and Loaded Cannon Distilleries. Their information, along with St. Augustine Distillery's info, will be in the description. I definitely highly recommend that you guys go and check out St. Augustine Distillery the next time you're in the area. And until next time, enjoy, and ushkabehe, and cheers.